Welcome, September. It is quite an honor to have you here today. There
Oh, thank
is
you.
truly, as I'm getting to know you a little bit on the side here, there is no doubt that God has beautifully equipped you with such fine work for his kingdom, for such a time as this. And in an effort today to celebrate Dr. King and this celebration weekend, we would be remiss not to have your work that God has called you to on a spotlight so that you can bring the light and beauty that you've brought to and from the civil rights movement to us. So I feel as though I could be here with you for hours, as there are multiple contributions that you've made that intrigue me, and I feel like we would be blessed to hear you expound on. So I'm thinking, if you're up for it, maybe we start at the beginning and
Okay.
we take it chronologically. Have you begin by sharing your journey of how you got into music and theater? And then I'd love to move towards the work that you had with the passages of Dr. King and then the work that you created out of that. Does that sound
Yeah,
like a good plan?
that sounds good, Tanya. That's a good plan. Thank you so much for having me. I really do feel honored. I feel humbled. I feel blessed to be invited to participate in this conversation and to just help share, some of my experiences with art that focuses on the work of Dr. King. Yeah. I
Great.
believe it's become a part of my life assignment, life ministry. As you'll hear, I work with Dr. Carson, and when I first started working with him, one of the things that he shared was he never expected for his whole uh, trajectory of his life to be totally shifted when he was approached by Dr. Coretta Scott King. But his life completely changed, and I feel even with my encounter with Dr. Carson, the same has happened for me. So let me start at the very, very, very beginning.
That sounds good.
Theater and music. I think I must have probably came out of the womb singing because I come from a family of singers and musicians and church goers, people who help to make the music in the church. So I guess you would call them the modern day Levites. I'm a part of that. I'm cut from that cloth. That's what we do. We help to lead people in worship. And I just grew up in it. As far as theater, I was doing theater in high school and then in college. And then at one point in my life, because of the particular denomination that I was serving, I was pulled away from theater. So for a little while, I wasn't doing theater probably in my early 20s or so. And it wasn't until 2005 when this is after I'm married and everything, and I marry Ivan Penn, and we have children. And my husband, Ivan, who is a journalist for the New York Times, at
Okay.
that time he was with the Baltimore Sun. He received a fellowship, the John S. Knight Fellowship at Stanford University. And I'm a young wife. We have three very, very young kids. And at this point, I had kind of become an at-home mom. That was where I was in that season of my life. I was an at-home mom, still singing some in the church, but for the most part, taking care of my kids. We go to Stanford, and I am reintroduced to theater. There was a production that they were advertising. They were looking for had auditions, sharing that they had auditions, and I dared to go and participate. And I'm going to say the name of it. And some people may get offended, but for me, it was such a blessing. It was the Vagina Monologues. And I
Okay.
auditioned and I got the role of sharing the story of I was there in the room. It's like the last monologue that talks about a mother who's in the room with her daughter when she gives birth. And for me, what took place in that theater experience was one of the most spiritual moments that I've had. And for me, it was a time of witnessing and really participating in the ministerial work that takes place in the rehearsal space. That was my experience in doing the Vagina Monologues, just listening to these uh, actors take on these characters and tell these stories. That year, every year there's a new theme, and that year the theme was the comfort women, the story of the Asian comfort women. And to hear these stories over and over again for me was therapeutic
Sure.
because I had been, before getting married, I'd been in a situation of domestic violence, and I never really had any type of help or talked it out, and got any therapy to work through it. And for me, in those rehearsal spaces, it was like straight on group therapies going on. It was so much healing, not just myself. I mean, the tears that from me, but all of the players, we all had our stories that we came to those rehearsal spaces with. And that's when it hit me. This is ministry. This is boots on the ground ministry. This is life giving. This is hope giving. So my love for theater was reignited when we moved to Florida. That was in 2006. I
Okay.
immediately just started working with the community theater spaces. I did Black Nativity. I did a few other smaller plays, and I also put up my first CD, my first EP. And one of the songs in there kind of talks about my experience of being a survivor of domestic violence, which at this point, since I've done, this work with the Vagina Monologues, I'm working through it. So now I can sing about it, right?
Yes.
So as I'm sharing that, I get on the radar of the Pinellas County Coalition for the Homeless, and they invite me to help them write a play about the stories of the homeless. And I am just totally embedded in the whole world. I mean, I spent a whole weekend being homeless with some of my castmates, just so
Did you?
that we can feel it and we can smell it and we can talk and we can just really digest their stories, and the notion that their stories are so close to ours.
Yes.
There is nothing far away. There is nothing that is so distant from us that we could not or would not experience that. We have aunts and uncles and cousins. I mean, all of the stories sounded just far too familiar. So again, I knew I'm in ministry. I'm boots on the ground ministry here.
Mhm.
And at that time, I also had met Dr. Carson when we were in Stanford. And that's when he invited me to participate with his production called Passages of Martin Luther King. And that's when I really started, as much as I knew freedom songs, I really started gaining such an appreciation for the significance of what the music did, of what it was and what it did. It was not just, these songs, it was glue, it was hope, it was power. It stirred, it guided, it comforted. All of that was in the music. And it was working with Dr. Claiborne Carson that I really started learning that Dr. King recognized the power of the music. It said that when he would go to different towns or different cities, if he could hear the people singing as he's approaching, he knew
You
that
know,
they were ready to participate in a nonviolent movement. If he didn't hear them singing, if he just heard lots of talking, he kind of questioned, will we be able to get good work done here? Yeah.
song is unifying, right? I mean,
Hmm. Hmm.
it gives people a way to come in unity around. Maybe the suffering is different, but there is a dialogue, there is a shared story in
Yes.
that.
Yes.
Well, you touched on this a little bit a few minutes ago, but it's so beautiful the way your early music from the womb and then the
Hmm.
theater and then kind of coming out of theater, having a family, and then being kind of unexpectedly invited back into theater, which was courageous, by the way, at that stage in life to jump back in, I imagine. But it
Yeah.
seems there that is where the ministry section, you'd always, of course, been in the church and been a part of worship, but it seems like when you went back in at Stanford, that's where
Hmm.
the real theater, music, and wow, this is actually boots on the ground ministry.
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful thing when faith and art come together to
Hmm.
portray truth and to give us words. And I think so often our society misses that cross section. It's either faith or it's art, but it's very rarely synchronized together. So, would you just
Well,
expound a little bit more what your journey's been as you're blending this faith and art?
I don't think it's so much that I'm the one doing the blending. I think it's
Fair.
always there. I think society, humanity wants a way to understand. And a part of how we understand is that we do categories. This is black. This is white. This is sacred. This is secular. And it
Yes.
makes it easier for our brains to participate in it. Okay, I can engage now because I'm supposed to do this here in this sacred section. I can do this in this secular section. But I
Mm.
don't think God ever I don't think that was God's plan. God never planned for us to do these categories and these dividing walls and saying, okay, this is holy unto the Lord and this is a disgrace. I mean, certainly there are certain practices that you
Sure.
don't want to participate. But I think for the most part, music, art, creating uh, ideas. I think so much of this is God inspired anyway. I
Yeah.
just don't think a lot of people don't give God the credit, for giving that inspiration.
And I
So
think you're right. It's easier for us just to say secular, sacred. But
yes, yes,
his word tells us that all space is sacred, right? All space is sacred. So that is
yes.
very well said. That
Yes.
is,
So even when I'm in that rehearsal space and I'm recognizing the healing that's taking place in my heart. So if I'm experiencing a sacred time of healing with these sisters that I'm just getting ready to know. And they come in all different colors, all different cultures, all different sexualities. And we are experiencing, and I'm watching them have their own sacred healing moment. That's God. That's God meeting us in the
yeah,
space, meeting us in the art form, meeting us in the making of it. Yeah.
yeah. Well, take us a little, let's stay in Stanford for just a minute before we move to your most recent work. Because
Thank you.
as we celebrate Dr. King, I want to hear about the play that Dr. Carson wrote. And
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken, he spent 30 years commissioned to edit Dr. King's papers. And the play was an outpouring from that. And so
Yes.
tell us what it was like to take letters that were turned into a play that you then musically directed. That is so beautiful.
It is beautiful, and it's still kind of surreal, all of it. When I first started working with Dr. Carson, he said he liked my voice on the music because he said you sound as if you've had some pain in your life. You sound as if you've experienced something. Because he would try to teach those freedom songs to some of the young people on campus, like the gospel choir. And these are great singers. But what had happened in the generation in between, the civil rights movement, and then moving on to the next, is many of the parents wanted to save their children from the hurt and the pain. So
Oh,
they stopped recounting the stories. They stopped talking about the trauma. Now I'm the generation right removed. I was in the first generation that was part of the integration.
yes.
The church that I went to, several folks marched with Dr. King. I had a Sunday school teacher who was bit by a dog. So I heard the stories as a little girl. I remember hearing them talking about what happened when they marched in Danville, Virginia, hearing them talk about when some of them went to North Carolina and did the march. I heard these stories. So that's in my background. And then also, I also bring to the table, like I shared, my situation with domestic violence. Pain is pain. And it may sound differently, but it you recognize pain. So when I sang, I mean, it was a basic freedom song. I can't remember what it was, but when I sang it, he just smiled. He smiled. You sound like you've known pain in your life. And that's when he invited me to work with him on the project and to help train and to help teach some of the younger people that we were going to be working with, how can you tap into that which has brought you pain? Okay, maybe you don't know all these stories. Maybe you don't have aunts and uncles who were talking about it, but I worked with these young folks, and it wasn't like bringing them up to speed, but just helping them to be honest with themselves and even their own lives, so that when they sang the songs, you can feel the growl, you can feel the guttural instinct that comes through in many of the freedom songs. Yeah, that's where it started. So,
And did you, when it says that you were the musical director, what exactly does that look like? Like, how do you go from play to musical director? So are you writing songs, both words and music, to
I
be?
I didn't write songs for Dr. Carson's play because it was true to the tradition. We took the songs, we took the tried and true freedom
Okay.
songs, the songs
I'm
from the Black church. We took Negro spirituals. We took the traditionals, and I would help with the arrangements. Now, when we went to China, I was a co-music director, and I worked with a very fine gentleman, a dear friend of mine, Reverend Ken Alston, and we were co-music directors. Reverend Ken Alston was singing with three more tenors, and he has all of these beautiful arrangements in him. So he and I worked together with choosing.
okay.
I would slot the songs. So Dr. Carson would give me a script, and I would see the different scenes. Okay, we're doing this scene. The March on Washington. We're doing this scene, the bombing of the 16th Street Church, where the four young women were killed, the four girls were killed. I see the lay of all the scenes, so I would plot the songs. I
Okay.
think this song complements this. I think this song complements this. And then, like, if you're talking about the March on Washington, we know that they sang "We Shall Overcome," and we know that Mahalia Jackson did a version of "How I Got Over." So some of that is like, of course, you're going to sing "How I Got Over" at that point.
Right.
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
So, but
Oh,
as far as writing some songs, when by the time I had transitioned and I was invited by the state senator to do an original production about the music itself, that's when we started writing some original music.
okay. Okay. So let's
We could
actually
sing
transition
Stanford.
to that. The
Okay.
sounds of the civil rights movement, the power of song. Give us an overview of this production and share what your hope and vision was and is, and yeah, just invite us into the beauty of that production.
Okay. Well,
It's a
before
big question, I know.
No, well, it's big, and it's a perfect segue because it was born out of my work with Passages of Martin Luther King. So we did several stateside productions of Passages of Martin Luther King, and I was always invited to help provide the music, to help arrange the music, arrange to script it, where it was going to fall. But then also we did two productions internationally. One was in Beijing, China, and that's the one where Reverend Kenneth Alston was the co-music director with me. And
Okay.
then there was also another group of singers that went to Jerusalem. Dr. Carson, with his work with Dr. Carson, with Dr. Martin Luther King's papers and his connections, he was actually invited to participate in the peace talks for the Middle East. And there are points where he would be on the phone with Hamas, and he would be on the phone with various leaders talking about peace and what does it look like and how can we make it work. And he made the suggestion to the State Department, since I'm involved in this, you should bring my play. You should, because there's something beyond just the talks, the conversation. He
Yes.
said, bring the play so that you can feel what peace looks like and feels like. So they took his advice, and the State Department fully funded the second international production that was in Jerusalem. We did. I always forget. I think it was 6 shows in Jerusalem, and then another 5 shows on the West Bank. So we had several different theaters, and these are small, lovely, community theaters, boots on the ground. Even now, I'm sorry, I'm getting ready to mess up, but we went into refugee camps. We went into so many spots. We're not saying we're going to go in there and we're going to do this place, and all of a sudden there's going to be peace in the land. We're
Right.
not that naive. But
Right.
what our assignment was to go and encourage those Palestinians who are being peaceful to continue to be peaceful. So especially the 2 refugee camps we went into, militia had been coming in there and taking these young people and putting guns in their hands and sending them out there to kill. These theaters were bringing the young people in and making art with them, various art projects, various ways of expression. Of course, they have anger, so this theater supervisor is trying to help them learn ways to manage your anger, to channel it into something creative. So our job was to go in and come alongside him. What he's doing, that's what we're doing, and we do it via Passages of Martin Luther King. Yeah.
And for like you said, to come and talk about peace is quite different than to give them words to experience the emotions that come through song and that
through the
come
song.
through play.
Yeah, and I'll share a really interesting dynamic. When we were first going, and I received the invitation, and it said that we would be working with the National Palestinian Theater. I was like, "What? I thought we were going to be working with the Israeli government." And I had to pray about it. And I grew up. I've been indoctrinated enough, and the church says we stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. But God loves all people, and there is a real oppression that's taking place. And there are people who are trying to protest peacefully. And my assignment was to go in and to help people to continue to protest peacefully. This is how we did it. This is how it was done, led by Dr. King. And these are some tools. And along with the music, I have to share that we took a little bit of a field trip when we were on the West Bank, because it was when we were there during the Arab Spring. So
Okay.
we're seeing um, the bullets. We're seeing warfare. We're seeing the battleground. Literally, We went into the home of one of the women who would help lead the women in protest, and I mean,
What a
she
privilege.
starts to sing some of their protest songs with us. And when you hear their songs, while I don't know the language, I know the feeling. I know what that feels
Mhm,
like because
mhm.
they had heard our protest songs. So they're singing their protest songs and they're teaching us. And as much as we can, we're singing together. It was such a humbling experience to sit with women of peace, practicing peace, and just trying to love on them, encourage them to continue. Let me do get there. What took place with my production?
Mhm.
I brought both sets of singers. There was a set of singers that was in China. There was some lap over, but there were some newer singers who went with us to Jerusalem. So
Okay.
for the production, Sounds of the Civil Rights Movement, The Power of Song, I took all of those singers. They're all part of the production, and so they're like the meat of the production. They
Sure.
provide most of the music, but we also have representation of Sam Cooke. Of course, you got to have that song, A Change is Going to Come. So we have
Yes.
that in there. We have a representation of Mahalia Jackson singing Precious Lord by Dr. Thomas Dorsey, and then also How I Got Over. And we also have the folk singers represented because when you're talking about the music of the movement, a lot of it was Black music, but the folk singers walked alongside us. When you talk
Yes.
about Pete Seeger, Guy Carawan, these people who saw what was happening, um, and were led to lend their voices to it. They weren't quiet about it. So I have a whole section where we do a medley of folk songs, and that's actually a sweet section in the production. Yeah.
Mhm. And again, unifying the emotion, and especially the emotion in a folk song, right, is
Yeah.
one of
Yeah, we did
unification,
Bob Dylan's "Blowing in the Wind." Yeah,
right?
that was a part of that section. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
And Joan Baez. Yeah, yeah. So we try to have a full representation. We even because each year I would do a new scene. I would add to it, with what's going on now in the culture, what needs to be
sure.
represented. So one year, so we're moving from the music of the movement to the more modern, freedom songs, the more modern protest art. And I add a scene about Black women and their hair. Um, Thank God, we're seeing the laws now being changed. But why did it have to come to the place where a law had to actually be put in effect? But women were being fired off their jobs. Young girls were being sent home because supposedly their hair was not in compliance, with the school rules and everything. So we did a scene about Black women here, and we bring in some India Ari, I love my hair, and we also included a scene. The latest version of the production has a scene that includes the Japanese American internment camp.
Okay.
One of my mentors at Fuller, Dr. Steve Yamaguchi, he was telling me the story about his mother. His mother, had been in an internment camp, actually over at the Santa Anita racetrack. She was there for quite some time. So we included that. We did some research and found so many songs that were written, inspired by, uh, situations in the internment camp, and then also songs that speak out against, our Asian brothers and sisters. So we included one of those songs in the production. Yeah.
The production is a lot wider in breadth than I originally understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate you expounding that. September, as we look forward to this weekend, to next week, to this month, as
Mm-hmm.
we celebrate Dr. King, his work, his letter from the jail, I'm going to read a quote to you. And I would just appreciate you responding to it. So here's the quote. We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. That's a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
It's true. Can you respond to that for us?
Yeah. We must, we come alongside God in this work. God is the ultimate creator, but I believe those who have an ear hear, and I believe we respond in a creative response. Um, Culture does not just change. That's what he's speaking to. That the world's not going to change. We have to help to create the culture that we want to see. We have to participate in it and help to create the very culture that we want to see. I recently heard a conversation with Andy Crouch, and there was something very interesting that he said in regards to our responsibility as Christians, and where many years ago it seemed as if they were failing that responsibility because of their response to culture. He said Christians would either condemn culture, you can critique it,
Mhm,
meaning you're analyzing culture.
mhm,
You can do the really cheap thing and just copy it,
mhm.
or you can become just consumers of culture. But the most powerful thing, as we as Christians especially trying to see change, is that we have to either cultivate it, that which is good, or we have to create the culture that we want to see. And I think that's a part of
Yes.
the responsibility that God is giving faith leaders,
Mm.
creatives, um, anyone who has a voice, a platform, who wants to see change. I think that's a part of what we have to do. And
Yeah.
a part of the beauty of that is that we don't have to do it alone. We can be creative collaborators. And that's when it becomes more powerful, when we do come together and we do allow all of the voices to speak into it. That's what makes it more powerful.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, that's actually a good segue because before we close our time together, I would love to hear from you, and especially with this reflection from this quote in your mind, what is
Mm.
there a lesson that's that has impacted you that you would like to impart to us, both to encourage our march forward, but also to convict and challenge? And I imagine through the work at Stanford and the production you've written, and getting to go to China and Jerusalem and hearing people like the professor at Fuller, um, I imagine you have started to have lessons stir within you, lessons that are helping you create and change culture. So, would you just share one that you would like to highlight with us?
That's a good question. And actually, just as you started mentioning it, something rose up in my
Okay.
spirit, and it has to do with not living into and not believing the stereotype of a people group. Um, to really take the time to see individuals, to see humans as individuals, and to get to know them as they are, who they are, their culture, and honestly what they truly believe, and not just buy into the group think of it. I say that because we had a very interesting experience when we went to Jerusalem. When we first went into the theater and we met our colleagues, the Palestinian actors, the first 2 or 3 days they were quite standoffish. They It was a quick meet and greet, but they were standoffish. We had interpreters, and many of them actually spoke English. But we learned in our rehearsals, especially when we got to certain scenes, and we're on the scene about JFK, the killing of JFK, politicians in America. And one night late after a rehearsal, we're at a restaurant, we're having a glass of wine and eating, and they admit, you know what, we like you guys. We actually like you. We didn't think we were going to like you because you're Americans. And they have a certain viewpoint of Americans. And then they had a certain viewpoint of Black Americans. But they and we're still friends on Facebook. We still follow each other on Instagram. We send messages to each other. They took the time to get to know us and our personalities. And they said, you know what, we cannot judge you because you're American. I need to get to know you. They're the ones who taught me that lesson. They were the ones who
Wow.
really taught me, let me just get to know people and not categorize a people group and say they are the bad ones and we're the good ones. Yeah.
And I appreciate that answer, because while it has a lot of gravity to it, it's also something that feels tangible and what's the word? Doable.
Yeah.
Very
doable.
Very doable. It would be intentional. It would require intention and care. But I'm glad that what you shared is something that each of us can take as we walk forward in influence and love in the sphere that God has called us to. Some of us have a teeny tiny sphere, and some have larger spheres, but God has specifically called us to each one of those. And so for us to leave this time together today encouraged to just look beyond the group to the individual. That's what Christ does. That's what we're called to do. So thank you for just bringing us right back to where we wanted our time with you to go. You've shared beauty. You've shared the gift of music and theater in the space of ministerial healing across generations and cultures and kinds. And so I'm thankful. I'm so thankful that you took the time to be with us. And more importantly, I'm grateful that you stepped out with the gifts and the talents and the skills that God has granted you, and you've made them available for the advancement of his kingdom. So thank you, September.
Amen. You're welcome.
Amen.
You're welcome. And just another quick practical note. We actually, for one of our productions, we actually had a table up there. And throughout the production, we would invite another person to the table. And so by the time the production was over, you had all of the nations were represented around the table. We had all different colors, all different ages, even generations. And it's that easy. That year, 2 or 3 people reached out to me and said, you know, for Thanksgiving that year, I made sure my table looked like your table. It's that practical.
Again, that doable, and yet that impactful. Thank you. Thank you, September.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
blessings to
Thank
you.
you. Blessings.